The next heading is Armies that Catholics must or must not belong to. Point 451. Catholics can join non-Catholic armies and fight for them in their wars, as long as they do not do anything sinful. On one occasion, when David fled from King Saul, he went to the Philistines and joined its army and fought in some of its wars. See 1 Kings chapters 27 and 28. Catholic soldiers joined the pagan Roman army and fought for its causes. If they were compelled to commit a sin by the army, they had to refuse if they did not want to commit sin. And in so doing, they either left the army, were killed, or imprisoned. The Theban Legion was a Catholic legion in the pagan Roman army. The Roman Martyrology lists some of the Catholic soldiers who belonged to this legion. On 826 it says, at Ventimiglia, a city in Liguria, St. Secundus, martyr, a distinguished man and officer in the Theban Legion. At Bergamo in Lombardy, St. Alexander, a martyr, who was one of the same legion. On 922 it says, at St. Maurice near Sion in Switzerland, the birthday of the holy Theban martyrs Maurice, Eusperius, Canditus, Victor, Innocent, and Vitalis, and their companions of the same legion. Several Catholic soldiers in the pagan Roman army were martyred when they refused to sacrifice to the idols. For example, on 1118 the Roman Martyrology says, also at Antioch, the holy martyr Hestius, a soldier, hearing the order that anyone refusing to sacrifice to idols should lay aside his military belt, he immediately took off his. For this reason he was cast into the river with a large stone tied to his right hand. End quote. And those of the Theban Legion mentioned above were martyred when they refused to sacrifice to idols. Point 452. In the eyes of God, wars are just or unjust. He's the ultimate one who judges if a war is just or unjust. Many times it is impossible or difficult for men to know if a war is just or unjust because they do not see things as God does. Hence, Catholic soldiers who fight on the side of an army that conducts an unjust war are not responsible and thus do not sin. Only the leaders who have the power to start or stop the war are responsible and thus sin. Point 453. However, the Pope, local Catholic bishop, or other competent Catholic authority has the authority to declare a war to be unjust and thus forbid Catholics to fight in it on the side of the army that conducts the unjust war. But without such a declaration, Catholics can fight in any army and in any war as long as they are not compelled by any army to do something sinful, such as rape or sin against the faith by idolatry or heresy. However, killing, torture, pillaging, and destroying structures are not sinful when commanded by a competent authority to do these things. Regarding torture, they must not do anything immoral to the victim. Point 454. Even though Catholic soldiers can fight in any war, that does not always mean they are fighting for the cause of the war, but only that they are doing their duty as soldiers for the well-being and safety of the state or nation of which they are citizens. For example, when Catholic soldiers fought in the pagan Roman army, they did not fight for the cause of expanding or defending paganism, but fought as their duty to maintain, propagate, or defend the well-being and safety of the empire of which they were citizens. In the same way, when Catholics paid taxes to the pagan Roman Empire, that did not mean they condoned the pagan things that were supported by the taxes, but only that their taxes would be used to maintain, propagate, and defend the well-being and safety of the empire. Point 455. When a Catholic army fights against another Catholic army, it is certain that at least one of the armies is fighting an unjust war. Hence, either one is fighting an unjust war while the other is fighting a just war, or both are fighting an unjust war. Point 456. In the case of a Catholic army that conducts an unjust war against another Catholic army, only those who have the power to start or stop the war are responsible and thus sin. Hence, Catholic soldiers do not sin, even if they are fighting in the army that conducts the unjust war. In these situations, a good Catholic in one army finds himself killing another good Catholic in another army, and both will be saved. Point 457. Because Catholics cannot belong to an army that commands them to do something sinful as a condition to enter or remain in the army, they cannot enter or remain in armies that require or consist of the following things. A. The soldier must take heretical or idolatrous oaths of allegiance, which is the sin of heresy or idolatry. As a general rule, the male soldiers are ruled by women, which is the heresy of feminism. As a general rule, women fight in the army and thus have actual combat roles, which is a heresy of feminism. Allow soldiers who are openly homosexuals or transgenders, which is immoral and heretical. The soldiers are commanded to do any other sinful thing. Footnotes on this is, see RJMA article, Catholics must not take the USA Pledge of Allegiance or serve in the USA military. And footnote 33, public obstinate acts of immorality are not only immoral but also heretical, because their actions say to the public that immorality is not immoral. Next heading, private property and riches are not intrinsically sinful and against class warfare. Point 458. One condition of a righteous government is that some or all of its citizens have the right to own private property unless deprived of it for a just reason. Point 459. Slaves, criminals, and in most cases women, and in some cases non-citizens, have no right to private property. And to preserve a Catholic state, non-Catholics must only be allowed to have limited ownership of private property or none, and if they are a great danger to the Catholic state. Point 460. God does not condemn all riches and thus all rich men. He condemns those who put their riches over God or do not use their riches for good causes. And God does not bless all poor men simply because they are poor. Most poor men are evil and end up in hell. God's word warns rich men more than poor men because riches are a great temptation since they can buy and cover up many sinful things, and lusting after riches causes men to commit other mortal sins to get and keep their riches, such as stealing, fraud, murder, and blackmail. 1 Timothy 6:9 says, For they that will become rich fall into temptation, into the snare of the devil, and to many unprofitable and hurtful desires, which drown men into destruction and perdition. Let no one then take out of context the word of God in order to idolize the rich or the poor, and thus promote class warfare, the rich against the poor or the poor against the rich. We quote in Proverbs 22:1-2, The rich and poor have met one another, the Lord is the maker of them both. And in Ecclesiasticus 26:4, Rich or poor, if his heart is good, his countenance shall be cheerful at all times. And Leviticus 19:15, Thou shalt not do that which is unjust, nor judge unjustly. Respect not the person of the poor, nor honor the countenance of the mighty, but judge thy neighbor according to justice. See RGMI Topic Index, Rich and Poor. Point 461. Beware of all forms of the class warfare heresy, which pits the poor against the rich, women against men, slaves against masters, subjects against rulers, etc. God has justly ordained the classes of rulers and subjects, bosses and workers, masters and slaves, rich and poor, men and women, and one ruler or race over another. The next heading is on economic systems. Point 462. Marxist communism is intrinsically evil for the following reasons. It promotes class warfare, especially by condemning all rich men and idolizing the poor. It denies its citizens the right to private property, as the state owns all the property. Hence it has all of its citizens equally poor and without ownership of property and with no incentive for prosperity and progress. While some of the first Christians shared all things in common, and some sold all they had and gave it to the church, it was by their free will and not by command, as many still had private property and riches. Regarding private property, St. Paul says, quote, Salute the brethren who are at Laodicea and Nymphos, and the church that is in his house. Colossians 4:15. And the richer Christians supported the poorer ones. Jesus says, quote, "He that hath two coats, let him give to him that hath none, and he that hath meat, let him do in like manner," Luke 3:11. And St. Paul says, now therefore, perform ye it also indeed, that as your mind is forward to be willing, so it may be also to perform, out of that which you have. For if the will be froward, it is accepted according to that which a man hath, not according to that which he hath not. For I mean not that others should be eased and you burdened, but by an equality. In this present time, let your abundance supply their want. 2 Corinthians 8:11-14. Point 463. Capitalism is not intrinsically evil. Good capitalism allows men to trade and own businesses in order to gain justified profits and to justifiably increase their possessions and to justifiably expand their businesses in order to promote the common good of the state and its citizens. Point 464. However, capitalism as practiced in the United States and Europe is intrinsically evil. It is immoral and idolatrous because money, profits, and possessions are its god. It allows men to make unjustifiable profits, to unjustifiably increase their possessions, and to unjustifiably expand their businesses in disregard for the common good of the state and its citizens. One of the main weapons that brings Antichrist to power is the love of money. Quote, "He that loveth gold shall not be justified, and he that followeth after corruption shall be filled with it." Ecclesiasticus 31:5. After listing several kinds of sins, St. Paul says, quote, "For the love of money is the root of all these evils, which some coveting have erred from the faith and have entangled themselves in many sorrows." 1 Timothy 6:10. Hence, evil capitalism promotes and fosters greed, materialism, selfishness, covetousness, envy, pride, and humanism. It teaches that men can never have enough money or possessions and thus breeds selfishness, greed, and covetousness. It teaches that men who do not have sufficient riches are failures and thus defective. And it produces and sells things that people do not need, and people buy things they do not need, and thus it is extremely wasteful and unfrugal. Evil capitalism also promotes usury for several reasons. 1, for greedy bankers and other loaners to make money on interest. 2, for greedy borrowers to increase their possessions, which they could not afford by their own labor. 3, for unfrugal borrowers to buy things they do not need. 4, for citizens to have enough riches and possessions in order to be acceptable in such a society, aka to achieve the American dream. 5, for governments to be enslaved to loaners, and 6, for governments to go bankrupt. See RJMI Topic Index, Capitalism. Point 465. Socialism, as practiced by Hitler's Germany, was good because of the following reasons. While it supported capitalism, private property, prosperity, and progress, it bridled them by state control and made them work for the common good of all its citizens and the environment. Hence it condemned and eradicated greed, selfishness, waste, unfrugality, covetousness, envy, sinful pride, and sinful destruction of the environment. In fact, no economic system in modern times was as successful and good for its citizens and the environment as the socialism of Hitler's Germany. Hitler's definition of socialism is as follows. This is Adolf Hitler speaking. A socialist is one who serves the common good without giving up his individuality or personality, or the product of his personal efficiency. Our adopted term socialist has nothing to do with Marxian socialism. Marxism is an anti-property. True socialism is not. Marxism places no value on the individual or individual effort or efficiency. True socialism values the individual, encourages him in individual efficiency, at the same time holding that his interest as an individual must be in consonance with those of the community. All great inventions, discoveries, achievements are first the product of an individual brain. It is charged against me that I am against property, that I am an atheist. Both charges are false. Adolf Hitler also said, quote, "Here we have a clear example of the difference between the socialist and communist state. In the socialist state, the individual or his professional community retains the individual and joint responsibility for himself or his professional associates. In a communist state, all responsibility and care is assumed by the state and shifted onto it. Socialism preserves individual liberty with the view to the welfare of the general public. Communism abolishes this freedom through collectivization, that is, by creating herds and herd animals whom the state drives to work and to the pasture." Point 466. Apostate Jews and Freemasons are the authors of Marxist communism as was practiced in the Soviet Union and sinful capitalism as practiced in the United States. The next heading is Signs and Wonders. Point 467. The Catholic faith must come before signs and wonders, that is, before apparent miracles, exorcisms, the casting out of devils from humans, apparitions, and fulfilled prophecies. Signs and wonders are either from God or from the devil. For example, regarding godly signs and wonders, Moses performed many miracles by the authority and power of God. See Exodus chapter 7 to 12. And Jesus performed many godly miracles, and so did Jesus' apostles and other Christians. Jesus says, quote, "And these signs shall follow them that believe in my name. They shall cast out devils. They shall speak with new tongues. They shall take up serpents. If they shall drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. And they shall lay their hands upon the sick, and they shall recover." Mark 16:17 to 18. Regarding demonic signs and wonders, St. Paul says that the Antichrist's coming is according to the working of Satan and all power and signs and lying wonders. 2 Thessalonians 2:9. And Jesus says, "For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch as to deceive, if possible, even the elect." Matthew 24:24. Point 468. Hence, from mere appearances, it is impossible to tell if a sign or wonder is from God or the devil. St. Paul says, quote, "For such false apostles and deceitful workmen, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ, into good Catholics. And no wonder, for Satan himself transformeth himself into an angel of light." 2 Corinthians 11:13 to 14. Point 469. To know if a sign or wonder is from God or the devil, one must examine the faith and morality of the sign and wonder worker, as well as the faith and morality of any messages produced by the sign and wonder. St. Paul says, "But though we or an angel from heaven preach a gospel to you, besides that which we have preached to you, let him be anathema." Galatians 1:8. And Moses says, quote, "If there arise in the midst of thee a prophet, or one that saith he dreamed a dream, and he foretold a sign and wonder, and that come to pass which he spoke, and he say to thee, let us go and follow strange gods which thou knowest not, and let us serve them, thou shalt not hear the words of that prophet or dreamer. For the Lord God trieth you, that it may appear whether you love him with all your heart and with all your soul or not." Deuteronomy 13:1 to 3. That is why St. Paul says, quote, "Try yourselves if you be of the faith. Prove ye yourselves, unless perhaps you be reprobates." 2 Corinthians 13:5. And he says, quote, "Prove all things, hold fast to that which is good," in 1 Thessalonians 5:21. And see Ezekiel chapter 13 and Jeremiah chapter 14 verses 14 to 16 on false prophets. For more information, see RGMI video audio, Faith Before Signs and Wonders, and see RGMI article, Brief on Signs and Wonders. The next heading is on divination and on some demonic apparitions and messages that pretend to be holy. Point 470. Divination is the art of attempting to foresee or foretell the future or to obtain hidden information. It is performed by rites and rituals and is either of God, the devil, or men. If it is of God, then it is legal and good. If not, then it is illegal and a sin against God and the true faith. Point 471. Divining when invoking the true God and in a non-sinful way and for a just cause is good. We read in Daniel on good divination in Daniel 4:6. God's prophets were good diviners. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, said to the holy prophet Daniel, quote, Belteshazzar, Daniel, prince of the diviners, because I know that thou hast in thee the spirit of the holy God, and that no secret is impossible to thee. Tell me the visions of my dreams that I have seen and the interpretation of them. And the prophets who were friends of the high priest Jesus were good diviners. Quote, this is recorded in Zechariah 3:8. Hear, O Jesus, thou high priest, thou and thy friends that dwell before thee, for they are diviners. For behold, I will bring my servant the Orient. Point 472. However, divining when not invoking the true God or in a sinful way or for an unjust cause is always evil and thus sinful. An example of sinful divination is recorded in Leviticus 20:27. A man or woman who divineth by a ghost or is an enchanter, dying let him die. They shall stone them, their blood be upon them. Point 473. Charismatic movements and sects that exalt signs and wonders over the Catholic faith and over obedience to all of God's commandments are condemned. They inflame silly and sinful passions in foolish and starry-eyed people. Point 474. Hence, any so-called heavenly apparition, message, or devotion to God, the Blessed Virgin Mary, the angels or saints, that is heretical or immoral, is erroneous in any other way, is false and of the devil, as well as the seer that propagates it. What follows is a list of few of many. Hildegard von Bingen, Bridget of Sweden, Teresa of Lisieux, Veronica Lucan and the Bayside apparitions, the Medjugorje apparitions, St. Stefano Gobi and his Marian movement of priests, Luisa Picaretta and the Divine Will apparitions, Maria Valtorta, Anne Catherine Emmerich, Maria Esperanza, Sister Faustina Kowalski and the Divine Mercy apparition, Mary Jane Even, Sister Agnes Katusko Sasakawa, and the Akita Japan apparitions, the Garabandal apparitions, the La Salette apparitions, and the Fatima apparitions. Point 475. Just because there are many false seers and false prophets does not take away from the true seers and true prophets, who to bad-willed men appear to be fools or madmen, but to good-willed men stand out all the more against the false seers and false prophets. We read in Jeremiah chapter 23, verses 25 to 28. I have heard what the prophets said that prophesy lies in my name and say, I have dreamed, I have dreamed. How long shall this be in the heart of the prophets that prophesy lies and that prophesy the delusions of their own heart, who seek to make my people forget my name through their dreams, which they tell everyone to his neighbor, as their fathers forget my name for Baal. The prophet that hath a dream, let him tell a dream, and he that hath my word, let him speak my word with truth. For what hath the chaff to do with the wheat, saith the Lord. The next heading is, the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament is the same God. Point 476. There is only one God, and there could be no other God. Hence the God of the Old Testament, known as the God of Adam, Noah, Abraham, and Israel, is the same as the God of the New Testament, known as the Most Holy Trinity, the Catholic God, and the God of the Holy Catholic Church. Malachi 3:6 says, For I am the Lord, and I change not. And St. Paul says in Hebrews 13:8, Jesus Christ is the same, yesterday, today, and forever. Point 477. God's ways in both the Old and New Testaments are the same. In both Testaments, God is a God of love, justice, mercy, wrath, and revenge. In both Testaments, he kills and makes to live. He strikes and heals. and there is none that can deliver out of his hand. In both testaments, God spares and kills men, women, children, and infants. In the Old Testament, we read, "For mercy and wrath are with him. He is mighty to forgive and to pour out indignation." Ecclesiasticus 16:12. And in Deuteronomy 13:39, it says, God speaking says, "See ye that I alone am, for there's no other God besides me. I will kill and I will make to live. I will strike and I will heal, and there is none that can deliver out of my hand." And we read in Deuteronomy 32:35, this is God speaking, "Revenge is mine, and I will repay them in due time, that their foot may give way. The day of destruction is at hand. The time makes haste to come." And the New Testament, Jesus says, quote, "Will not God revenge his elect who cry to him night and day? And will he have patience in their regard? I say to you that he will quickly revenge them." Luke 18:7-8. And he says, and Jesus speaking says, "But as for those my enemies who would not have me reign over them, bring them hither and kill them before me." Luke 19:27. The next heading is, "The New Covenant replaced the Old Covenant." Point 478. When Jesus Christ died on the Holy Cross, he ended and replaced the Old Covenant with the New Covenant. Judaism with Catholicism. The synagogue or the Old Covenant Church with the Catholic Church. The Old Covenant sacraments and rituals and disciplinary laws with the New Covenants, the Catholic Church's sacraments and rituals and disciplinary laws. The Levitical priesthood with the Catholic priesthood, which was the Melchizedek priesthood. And the Israelites as God's chosen people with Catholics as God's only chosen people. Regarding the covenant, the prophet Jeremiah says, "Behold, the day shall come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant, the old covenant, which I made with their fathers." And St. Paul, that's Jeremiah 31:31-32. And St. Paul says, "He, Jesus Christ, taketh away the first, the old covenant, that he may establish that which followeth the new covenant." Hebrews 10:9. And St. Paul says, "But now he hath obtained a better ministry, by how much more also he is a mediator of a better testament, the new covenant, which is established on better promises. For if the former, the old covenant, had been faultless, there should not indeed have been a place sought for a second." Hebrews 8:6-7. Regarding the priesthood, we read St. Paul says, "If then perfection was by the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there for another priest that should arise according to the order of Melchizedek, and not according to the order of Aaron? For the priesthood being translated, it is necessary that a translation also be made of the law." Hebrews 7:11-12. Regarding God's chosen people, Isaiah prophesied that a time would come when God will call his chosen people, the Israelites, by another name. Quote, "And you shall leave your name, Israelites, for an execration to my elect. And the Lord God shall slay thee and call his servants by another name." That's Isaiah 65:15. And that other name is Christian. We read in Acts 11:26, "At Antioch, the disciples were first named Christians." Hence, the only chosen people during the New Covenant era are Christians, both Christian Jews and Christian Gentiles. Hence, St. Paul says, quote, "For there is no distinction of the Jew and the Greek, for the same is Lord over all, rich unto all that call upon him." Romans 10:12. And St. Paul says, "The Gentiles should be fellow heirs of the same body and co-partners with the Israelites of his promise in Christ Jesus by the gospel." Ephesians 3:6. And the only true Christians are Catholics. Point 479. Hence Jesus says that whosoever teaches that both the old and new covenants are in force at the same time destroys the new covenant, as well as undermines and denies the purpose of the old covenant when it was in force, and thus cannot be under any covenant with God. We read in Mark 2:22, "And no man putteth new wine, the new covenant, into old bottles, the old covenant. Otherwise the wine will burst, the bottles, and both the wine will be spilt and the bottles will be lost. But new wine must be put into new bottles. Point 480. Beware then of the heresy which teaches that the old covenant is still in force and that Christ-denying Jews are under it. Christ-denying Jews are under a covenant with the devil and not with God. The prophet Isaiah says that evil Jews are under a covenant with hell. Quote, "Wherefore hear the word of the Lord, ye scornful men, who rule over my people that is in Jerusalem. Your league with death shall be abolished, your covenant with hell shall not stand. When the overflowing scourges shall pass, you shall be trodden down by it." Isaiah chapter 28, verse 14 and 18. Point 481. And beware the heresy which states that after Jesus comes the second time, he will reinstitute the old covenant while he reigns on earth, known as dispensational millennialism. See RJMI topic index, millennialism. The next heading is, many Old Testament prophecies are still being fulfilled during the New Covenant era. Point 482. While God's covenants during the Old Testament era have ended and been replaced by the New Covenant, many Old Testament prophecies are still being fulfilled during the New Covenant era, especially regarding the reign of the Antichrist, the conversion of the Jews, the battle of Armageddon, the second coming of Jesus Christ, the general judgment, and the everlasting earthly paradise that Jesus will create upon his second coming. For example, regarding the reign of the Antichrist, this is the holy prophet Daniel speaking. "I considered the horns, and beheld another little horn, the Antichrist, sprung up out of the midst of them, and 3 of the first horns were plucked up in the presence thereof. And behold, the eyes like the eyes of a man were this horn, and a mouth speaking great things." Daniel 7:8. And Daniel 7:25 says, "And he shall speak words against the High One, and shall crush the saints of the Most High, and he shall think himself able to change times and laws, and they shall be delivered into his hand until a time, a times, and a half time." That's 3.5 years, and that's Daniel 7:25. And Daniel 12:1 says, "But at that time shall Michael arise, the great prince, who standeth before the children of the people of thy people, and the time shall come such as never was from the time that the nations began, even until that time. And at that time thy people shall be saved, and every one that shall be found written in the book." Regarding the conversion of the Jews in the final days, we read about this in Malachi chapter 4, 5-6. "Behold, I will send you Elias the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord," the second coming of Jesus Christ, "and he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers." And regarding the battle of Armageddon, the second coming, and the general judgment, we read from the prophet Joel in chapter 3, verse 9-16. "Proclaim ye this among the nations. Prepare war. Rouse up the strong. Let them come. Let all the men of war come up. Cut your plowshares into swords, and your spades into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Break forth and come, all ye nations, from round about, and gather yourselves together. There will the Lord cause all the strong ones to fall down. Let them arise, and let the nations come up into the valley of Jehoshaphat. And there I will sit to judge all nations round about. Put ye in the sickles, for the harvest is ripe. Come and go down, for the press is full. The fats run over, for their wickedness is multiplied. Nations, nations, in the valley of destruction. For the day of the Lord is near, in the valley of destruction. The sun and the moon are darkened, and the stars have withdrawn their shining. And the Lord shall roar out of Sion, and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shall be moved, and the Lord shall be the hope of his people, and the strength of the children of Israel." And regarding the second coming of Jesus Christ, the prophet Isaiah says in chapter 13, verse 9-10, "Behold, the day of the Lord shall come, a cruel day, and full of indignation, of wrath and fury, to lay the land desolate, and to destroy the sinners thereof out of it. For the stars of heaven in their brightness shall not display their light. The sun shall be darkened in his rising, and the moon shall not shine with her light. And regarding the general judgment, the prophet Isaiah says in Isaiah 11:4, "But he shall judge the poor with justice, and shall reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips, and he shall slay the wicked." And regarding the everlasting earthly paradise, Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 4:27, "For thus saith the Lord, all the land shall be desolate, but yet I will not utterly destroy." And the prophet Isaiah says in 65:17, "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be in remembrance, and they shall not come upon the heart." And Isaiah also says in 60:21, "And thy people shall be all just, and they shall inherit the land forever." Also see Isaiah chapter 25, verse 8, Isaiah chapter 65, verse 17, 19, and 25, and Isaiah chapter 66, verse 22, and see 2 Peter 3:13 and Apocalypse 7:17. The next heading is on Old Testament feast days and saints on the calendar. Point 483. While the Old Testament rituals and ceremonies ended and were replaced by the New Covenant rituals and ceremonies as instituted by the Catholic Church, the Old Testament festival days should still be remembered and commemorated, just as the Old Testament saints, such as Abraham, Moses, Job, and the Maccabees, should be remembered and commemorated. This is important because the Old Testament festival days and saints belong to the Catholic Church only. Hence, the apostate Jews have no right to them because they are not faithful to the Old Testament, and precisely because they are not faithful to the New Covenant. For example, Jesus said that the Jews who do not believe in him do not believe in the true Moses. Quote, "Think not that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one that accuses you, Moses, in whom you trust. For if you did believe Moses, you would believe me also. For he wrote of me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words?" John 5:45-47. Therefore, Catholics should not let the apostate Jews try to steal our Old Testament festivals and saints. By keeping them off the Catholic calendars allows these Christ-denying Jews to think that the Old Testament festivals and saints belong to them and not to Catholics, or at least belongs to both, when in truth they only belong to Catholics. Point 484. Hence, some Old Testament festival days should be commemorated, such as the following. A. The rededication of the temple by the Maccabees, also known as Hanukkah, and also known as the Feast of Lights. It is commemorated on the 12th month. The Temple of Jerusalem had been desecrated, but not destroyed, by the Seleucid ruler Antiochus IV Epiphanes in 167 BC. After the success of the Maccabean revolt, the Maccabees cleansed and rededicated the temple and the altar in 164 BC and mandated an annual 8-day celebration to commemorate this joyful event. 1 Maccabees 4:36-59. B. The victory of Queen Esther over Ammon and his decree against the Jews living in the Persian Empire. It is commemorated on the 2nd or 3rd month. Read the book of Esther's. C. The Feast of Tabernacles, also called Sukkoth, which should replace the secular feast day of Thanksgiving. It is commemorated in the 9th or 10th month. The older ingathering or fruit harvest festival became a commemoration of the 40 years that the Hebrews wandered in the desert, living in temporary shelters like tents or booths. See Leviticus 23, verse 35-36, verse 39-43, and Deuteronomy 16, 13-15. D. The Passover meal is already on the calendar and celebrated on Maundy Day. It is commemorated in the 3rd or 4th month, the day before Good Sixth Weekday, when Christ died for our sins. Point 485. And some Old Testament saints should be commemorated, such as the following saints which are already in the Catholic calendar composed by Mary's Little Remnant. A. 715. Old Testament holy women: Eve, Sarah, the wife of Abraham; Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, Bella, Zelpha; the prophetess Miriam, the sister of Moses and Aaron; Rahab, Ruth, Judith, Susanna, Sarah, wife of Tobias; Queen Esther, and the prophetess Huldah. B. 8:1. The 7 Maccabean martyrs and their mother. C. 8:20. The prophets Enoch, Samuel, Elias, Eliseus, Job, Ananias, Azarias, and Mishael. D. On 9:4, the Old Testament supreme religious rulers, Moses, Aaron, and Esdras. E. On 9:7, the Old Testament judges, Deborah, Gideon, and Samson. F. 10:9, the Old Testament supreme patriarchs, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. G. 10:10, St. Melchizedek. H. 10:12, the Old Testament fathers, Adam, Abel, Seth, Lot, Caleb, Tobit, Tobias, and Mordecai. I. 11:21, the Old Testament lesser prophets, Osee, Joel, Amos, Abdias, Jonas, Micaiah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Sophonias, Aggeus, Zacharias, and Malachias. J. On 12:3, the Old Testament kings and other rulers, Joseph, Joshua, King David, King Hezekiah, King Josias, and Nehemiah. K. On 12:17, Old Testament major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Baruch, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And on 12:23, the Maccabees, Matthias, John, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan. The next heading is Against Apostate Jews and Apostate Judaism. Point 486. Apostate Jews do not profess belief in Jesus Christ, and thus are known as Christ-denying Jews or perfidious Jews. Point 487. Apostate Jews are on the road to damnation, are cursed and not blessed, are sons of the devil, as are all unbelievers, are not God's chosen people, and are not under a covenant with God, but under a evil covenant with Satan. We read in John 3:36, He that believeth in the Son hath life everlasting, but he that believeth not the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abideth on him. And we read in John 1:11-12, He, Jesus, came unto his own, the Jews, and many of his own received him not. But as many as received him, he gave them power to be made sons of God, to them that believe in his name. And we read in Galatians 3:26, For you are all children of God by faith in Christ Jesus. Point 488. Hence beware of the heresies which state that apostate Jews can be in the way of salvation, are blessed and thus not cursed, are not sons of the devil but are sons of God, are God's chosen people, or under a covenant with God. 4.489. Christ-denying Jews crucified and murdered Christ by the hand of the Romans. Point 490. Beware the heresy that Pilate wanted to kill Jesus Christ. Pilate did not want to kill Jesus Christ. Instead, Pilate favored him and tried to save him from the death sentence. However, Pilate eventually sentenced Christ to death to prevent the revolt by the Christ-denying Jews. Point 491. All apostate Jews are guilty of the inherited sin of deicide and thus are guilty of murdering Christ. They inherit this sin from their ancestors who murdered Christ. The only way they can get rid of this sin is by believing in Jesus Christ and getting baptized into the Catholic Church. The Christ-denying Jews inherited this curse from the Jews who consented to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ when they said, quote, and the whole people answering said, His blood be upon us and upon our children, as recorded in Matthew 27:25. St. Hippolytus on Proverbs in the 3rd century says, These things he understands of the people of the Jews and their guilt in the blood of Christ. St. Cyprian in his work against the Jews from the 3rd century says, in Isaiah the Lord says, Now I will not release your sins. When you stretch forth your hands, I will turn away my face from you. For if ye multiply prayers, I will not hear you, for your hands are full of blood. By this alone the Jews can receive pardon of their sins, if they wash away the blood of Christ slain in his baptism and passing over into his church, obey his precepts. And St. Augustine says in the City of God, which was in 426 AD, we say to the Jews, You killed Christ, although it was their parents who did so. So these persons still grieve that they have, in some sort, did what their progenitors did. Although therefore those that receive the Spirit of mercy and grace and believe shall not be condemned with their impious parents, yet they shall mourn as if they themselves had done what their parents did. And that's in Book 20, Chapter 30. And St. Augustine also says in his book Against the Jews wander over the entire earth, their backs bent and their eyes cast downward, forever calling to their minds the curse they carry with them. Point 492. Current-day Judaism, as practiced by apostate Jews, such as Talmudic Judaism, is not true Judaism, but is a false Judaism, a Christ-denying Judaism. True Judaism died with Christ and rose as Catholicism. Point 493. Jesus Christ is the one and only Messiah, and thus any other Messiah is a false Messiah, an Antichrist, and thus of Satan. We read in 1 John, the beloved St. John says, "Who is a liar? But he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ. This is Antichrist, who denieth the Father and the Son." 1 John 2:22. Point 494. It is a heresy as taught by apostate Jews to believe that a person's race is determined by the matriarchal line instead of the patriarchal line. The dogma is that a person's race is determined by his father's race and not by his mother's race. For more information, see RJMI Topic Index, Jews Apostate. The next heading is Against Zionism and Christian Zionism. Point 495. Zionism is the belief that apostate Jews have the right from God to repossess Israel after the Romans destroyed the temple in AD 70 and banished the apostate Jews from Israel. God and his Catholic Church condemn this belief because only faithful Jews have the right from God to repossess Israel. And the only faithful Jews during the New Covenant era are Catholic Jews, because only Catholics are God's chosen people during the New Covenant era, and hence only Catholics can be faithful to God. Therefore, the only Jews who have the right from God to repossess Israel are Catholic Jews, and in God's good time. Consequently, every Jew who is not Catholic does not have the right from God to repossess Israel, and thus, in the eyes of God, any such possession or attempted possession is illegal, mortally sinful, and an abomination in a place where it does not belong. Point 496. Half Zionists believe that apostate Jews have the right to possess Israel and Jerusalem, but they also believe that Palestinians have the same right. Hence they propose that apostate Jews and Palestinians share Israel and Jerusalem. God and his Catholic Church condemn half Zionists because apostate Jews have no right from God to possess Israel, not even the smallest part of Israel. However, God is using the half Zionists to rightly expose some of the crimes of apostate Israel and certain Jews throughout the world. Point 497. Christian Zionists are nominal Christians who believe that apostate Jews have the right from God to repossess Israel, rebuild the temple, and offer animal sacrifices, all of which have been condemned by the Catholic Church. They also believe that apostate Jews are under a religious covenant with God, are blessed by God, and are God's chosen people, all of which have been infallibly condemned as apostasy by the Catholic Church. Christian Zionists, then, are apostates in the strict sense of the word for justifying Christ-denying Jews, and hence denying Jesus Christ by implication. Christian Zionists are the stupidest, evilest, and most hypocritical of all Zionists, because they claim to believe that Jesus Christ is the only Messiah, and that men need to believe in him to be saved, yet they also believe that apostate Jews who deny Jesus Christ as a Messiah and are bringing the Antichrist to power are good and blessed by God. Without knowing anything about Catholic dogmas, anyone can see that these beliefs are illogical and contradictory. Christian Zionists have indeed called evil good and have blessed what God has cursed, and thus confirm Christ-denying Jews in their deadly error of apostasy from God. We read in Isaiah 5:20, "Woe to you that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness. In Isaiah 9:16, they that call this people blessed, Christ denying Jews, shall cause them to err, and they that are called blessed shall be thrown down headlong. For more information, see RGMI Topic Index, Zionism. The next heading is on the everlasting earthly paradise. Point 498. Some of the things mentioned in this section are dogmas and some are allowable opinions, ones that I hold. The following sections regarding millennialism and amillennialism will specify which opinions are allowable and which are dogmas. The opinion mentioned in this section is called amillennialism or non-millennialism. Point 499. During his second coming, Jesus Christ will kill all the evildoers and burn the fallen earth and its heaven with fire. But he will not utterly destroy the fallen earth and its heaven. After he utterly desolates the old earth and the old heaven by fire, he will transform them into a new earth and a new heaven that will last forever. Regarding the everlasting earthly paradise, A, Christ will personally reign in it. B, it will last forever, and hence will not be temporary. Hence, this earthly paradise will be everlasting, and thus will not only last for 1,000 years. C, it will never have any sin or sinners in it, and thus there will never be a rebellion in this earthly paradise. D, all the devils and reprobates will be sealed in hell forever, and never more released upon the face of the earth. E, there will be neither death nor procreation. F, it will be inhabited by all the elect forever in their resurrected and glorified bodies. G, this everlasting earthly paradise will be united to heaven, the heaven of God's home, in a way we cannot comprehend. H, the saved Christian Israelites will then inherit the promised land forever, and the saved Christian Gentiles will inherit their respective lands forever. Christ the King, the Son of David, will rule on the earth over all the nations and men from the New Jerusalem that will come down from heaven and land where the current Jerusalem is. And each nation will have its own king and queen, while Christ will be the King of Kings and Mary the Queen of Queens. I, all the elect will visit Christ the King and Mary the Queen in the New Jerusalem from time to time. The next heading is heresies and allowable opinions regarding millennialism. Point 500. Millennialism interprets the 1,000 years mentioned in Apocalypse 20 to mean a 1,000-year earthly reign of Christ upon the earth after his second coming, after which there will be the general judgment. Hence it teaches that there will be a 1,000-year intermediate kingdom of Christ upon earth before his everlasting kingdom. Here's the reverse that mentions the 1,000 years in Apocalypse 20, verse 1 to 3. And I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, the old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set up a seal upon him, that he should no more seduce the nations till 1,000 years be finished, and after that he must be loosed a little time. Point 501. Amillennialism, which means non-millennialism, interprets 1,000 years to mean a time period during the New Covenant era before the second coming of Jesus Christ. St. Augustine and I hold this opinion. The one difference is that St. Augustine believed that the whole New Covenant era up to the reign of the Antichrist is the 1,000 years, and thus a symbolic period of time. I hold the opinion that the 1,000 years is from the time of Christ's death in AD 33 to the beginning of the Great Apostasy in AD 1033. And this is a literal period of time. And thus this is a literal period of time. The everlasting earthly paradise that Christ creates upon his second coming, as mentioned in the previous section, is the amillennialist opinion that St. Augustine and I hold. See RGMI book, The Great Apostasy, Satan Chained in AD 33, and the depaganization of the world begins, and the chapter Satan Unchained in AD 1033, and the repaganization of the world and the Great Apostasy begins. And see RGMI video audio, The Chaining and Unchaining of Satan. Point 502. The following are some of the opinions held by millennialists, some of which are allowable opinions, some are heretical, and some may be heretical. Point A. Most of the millennialists, aka childlists, believe that after his second coming, Christ the King will rule the earth for 1,000 years or a long period of time in an intermediate kingdom before the general judgment and his everlasting kingdom. And most teach that this intermediate kingdom will be a new earth, an earthly paradise. B. Most millennialists have the elect who died before Christ's second coming resurrected and living in this intermediate kingdom in their glorified bodies. And most have the elect who survived the second coming not dying and thus living in this intermediate kingdom and procreating. C. Some millennialists believe that no one will fall away in the intermediate kingdom and thus there will be no rebellion, while others believe that some who have not died will fall away, which will culminate into a great rebellion that Christ puts down by killing all the evildoers as he did during the second coming. The former opinion is allowable, but the latter opinion, the rebellion, may be heretical, as I've had not time to thoroughly study it. D. At the end of the intermediate kingdom, some millennialists believe Christ will create another earthly paradise that will be everlasting and thus be an everlasting kingdom on earth, but some believe that the earthly paradise will end forever and thus the elect will only be in heaven and thus the everlasting kingdom will only be in heaven. The former opinion is allowable and may be a dogma, but the latter opinion, that there will be no everlasting earthly paradise, may be heretical, as I have not had the time to thoroughly study it. E. Most millennialists have the general judgment occurring at the end of the intermediate kingdom. Point 503. Dispensational millennialism is heretical and apostate. It teaches that after the second coming, Christ will reinstitute the old covenant for the Jews living in Christ's millennial kingdom, and thus will not be under the new covenant. This heresy then denies the purpose and need of the new covenant, and thus denies the purpose and need of Jesus Christ to redeem and save men. It goes backward to a time when Jesus had not yet come, and thus when Jews were looking forward to the coming of the Messiah, and thus in essence denies that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. Some even have the animal sacrifices reinstituted. Hence they replace Christ, the Messiah, with an animal. The animal sacrifices then becomes not a symbol of the Messiah, which it was during the Old Testament era, but the Messiah itself, while Christ's sacrificial death and the Holy Mass is replaced by animal sacrifices. Point 504. Some dispensational millennialists also believe that Christ-denying Jews during the whole New Covenant era from the time of Christ's death are dispensed from being under the New Covenant and are still under the Old Covenant, which hence, according to this heresy, the Old Covenant has not ended and been replaced by the New Covenant. They call the dogma that the Old Covenant ended when Christ died and was replaced by the New Covenant replacement theology, which according to them is heresy. Therefore, they refer to Christ-denying Jews as God's chosen people and thus as blessed by God, which is another heresy. It is heresy because it is a dogma that Christ-denying Jews are cursed by God and are not God's chosen people. Only Catholics, both Catholic Jews and Catholic Gentiles, are God's only chosen people during the New Covenant era. The most influential entity that taught this heretical form of dispensationalism is the Vatican II Church. For more information, see RGMI Topic Index, Millennialism and Dispensationalism. The next heading is the heresy that an interior intention is necessary for the validity of the sacraments. Point 505. To validly confect a sacrament, the minister must intend to do as the Catholic Church does, which means he must use the proper form and matter and must act seriously as opposed to a mocking or joking way. Point 506. Beware the heresy which teaches that the minister must interiorly intend to confect the sacrament for the sacrament to be validly administered, which began with the scholastics. The interior intention heresy only presumes that sacraments are confected because no one can read a man's heart unless that man makes his intention manifest. Because no mere man can know the secret thoughts of another man, the interior intention opinion makes it easy for a malicious or faithless minister to secretly not intend to confect the sacrament, and hence the sacrament he administers are not confected, and the people have no way of ever knowing. In short, this heresy is a prescription for chaos. This heresy teaches that no man can know for certain if he validly received the sacrament of baptism, if he validly received the sacrament of penance, and hence was absolved of his sins, if he validly received the sacrament of confirmation, if he validly received the sacrament of extreme unction, and if he validly received the sacrament of orders. No priest can never be certain that he is a priest, and he can only presume he is a priest. No bishop can be certain he is a bishop, he can only presume he is a bishop. And no pope can ever be certain that he is the pope, because a pope needs to be a priest and then a bishop before he can become the pope. For more information, see R.J. my book, The Minister's Sacramental Intention. The next heading is on the Clementine Vulgate and heretical Bible commentaries. Point 507. The Clementine Vulgate's Old Testament contains many errors, contradictions, inconsistencies, and even some heresies. While the Clementine Vulgate's New Testament also contains textual errors, it does not contain heretical errors and contains only a few errors in comparison to the many errors in the Old Testament. Point 508. All the nominal Catholic English Bibles I have access to contain idolatrous or heretical commentaries, some more than others, such as the original Douay-Rheims Bible, the Challoner Bible, the Haydock Bible, the Confraternity Bible, and the New American Bible. For more information, see R.J. my book on the Clementine Vulgate's errors and on heretical commentaries. The next heading is Lying versus Non-Sinful Falsehoods. Point 509. A lie is a sinful falsehood. Point 510. Hence, a falsehood that is not sinful is not a lie and can even be good and necessary. Point 511. An error regarding facts is a non-sinful falsehood and thus is not a lie, although one can be guilty of the sin of affected ignorance for not sufficiently searching for the truth. But that would be a sin of affected ignorance and not a sin of lying. Point 512. Falsehoods told to deceive or evade can be sinful and thus are lies, or can be just and thus are good. A. If the cause is just and no sin is committed in telling a falsehood to deceive or evade, then a falsehood is just and thus is not a sin. Non-sinful deceptions and evasions can be used against enemies or friends. A non-sinful deception or evasion can be used against a friend to protect him from information he should not know. B. If the cause is unjust or a sin is committed in telling a falsehood to deceive or evade, then the falsehood is a lie and thus is a sin. For more information, see R.J. my article, A Lie is a Sinful Falsehood. The next heading is Oaths and Swearing. Point 513. Professions of faith, such as the Apostles' Creed, pledges of allegiance, vows, such as vows of poverty, chastity, or obedience, and oaths of fidelity and marriage vows, are examples of oaths. And men can swear in order to affirm oaths, promises, threats, statements, or testimonies. Point 514. Catholics can take oaths with or without swearing. Point 515. Catholics can take an oath for a just cause without swearing. For example, I vow to remain chaste until the day I die, or I promise to remain chaste until the day I die, or I vow to remain chaste until the day I die, so help me God, which is not swearing, but asking God to help you remain chaste. Point 516. And Catholics can take an oath for a just cause and swear to men by God, but they must not swear by anything other than by God. For example, I vow to you, my religious superior, to remain chaste until the day I die, and this I swear by God. Or, I swear by God that I vow to remain chaste until the day I die. Or, as God is my witness, I vow to remain chaste until the day I die. In the following passage, Abraham's servant swore by God to Abraham, quote, Now Abraham was old and advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed him in all things. And he said to the elder servant of his house, who was the ruler over all he had, Put thy hand under my thigh, that I may make thee swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, that thou take not away from my son of the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. The servant therefore put his hand under the thigh of Abraham his Lord, and swore to him upon this word. Genesis 24, verses 1 to 3 and verse 9. And Rahab had the two Israelite spies swear to her by God. We quote, Now therefore, swear ye to me by the Lord, that as I have shown mercy to you, so you also will show mercy to my father's house. Joshua 2:12. And St. Paul swore, quote, For God is my witness, whom I serve in my spirit in the gospel of his Son, and that without ceasing I make commemoration to you. Romans 1:9, and St. Paul says in Galatians 1:20, Now the things which I have wrote to you, behold, before God I lie not. For more information, see RJMI Topic Index, Oaths and Swearing. The next heading is Canonizations are not infallible. Point 517. Canonizations are not infallible. The only persons known to be saints with infallible certainty are those mentioned in the Bible as holy and saved. Point 518. During the canonization process, when judging and declaring a person to be a saint, the Pope does not teach on faith or morals, but judges. He is judging the sanctity of a person. The Pope cannot infallibly judge that a living or dead person not mentioned in the Bible is sanctified, because that person may have secretly embraced heresy or secretly committed some other mortal sin, even if just by thought. We read in Psalm 18:13, Who can understand sins? From my secret ones cleanse me, O Lord. And in 1 Corinthians 4:4, St. Paul says, For I am not conscious of myself of anything, yet I am not hereby justified, but he that judgeth me is the Lord. Point 519. Hence men cannot have infallible certainty that a canonized saint is truly a saint. The most certainty that one can have is a moral certainty, which means one is certain based upon all the available evidence, but not infallibly certain because of the possibility of hidden or undiscovered evidence or motives that prove the person could not be a saint. Point 520. The only infallible judgment a pope can make regarding the condition of a person's soul is that a person is not in a state of grace, when that person's original sin or mortal sin is notorious. For more information, see RJMI book, Canonizations are not infallible. The next heading is, RJMI is the sole ruler of the Catholic Church. Point 521. The sole ruler of the Catholic Church in these latter days of the Great Apostasy is Richard Joseph Michael Ibrani, as he is the only one who is teaching, living, and enforcing the full deposit of the Catholic faith. Hence, as long as he remains faithful, all Catholics owe him obedience in all things regarding the Catholic faith until the Catholic Church gets a pope to rule her. For more information, see RJMI letter, RJMI's authority to rule Catholics, RJMI letter, RJMI is the sole ruler of the Catholic Church in these final days, RJMI letter on RJMI and Mary's Little Remnant, and RJMI's article, RJMI's position and authority. The last heading is An Act of Faith. Point 522. O my God, I firmly believe all the sacred truths which thy holy Catholic Church believes and teaches, because thou hast revealed them who canst neither lie nor be deceived. And here ends the profession of faith for the days of the Great Apostasy. This recording was produced by Mary's Little Remnant, 302 East Joffrey Street, Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, 87901-2878, and can be accessed on my St. John the Baptist website at www.johnthebaptist.us.